Okay, hi everyone. Welcome. I see people are joining the webinar. We're also just started the streaming in YouTube. And let me stop the sound for the YouTube, otherwise I hear myself twice. So, okay, I think we can get started. Everything should be working. If something happens, please let me know from a technical perspective. But I think everything is ready to get started. So again, welcome to the first AI ThoughtCon organized by the AI Localization think tank. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today, either through our Zoom webinar or through YouTube. When we started the think tank back in November 2024, we never dreamed we would have such an impact. Today, more than 1,000 industry professionals have shown their interest in our conference. This validates the existence of the think tank and that what we're doing is actually meaningful and helpful for the community. Thank you for giving us the strength to continue. Now more than ever, we need community, knowledge sharing, and mutual support without hidden agendas or without commercial constraints. I want to thank all our think tank members who have poured their hearts into keeping the think tank alive for all this time, and into making this conference a reality. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you also to all our incredible speakers who selflessly volunteered their time to be here with us today, and also tomorrow and on Wednesday. This conference would not exist without them. Today, the theme of the conference is the future. We talk about the future, and to talk about it, we will actually go back in time to learn from past human experiences, and we will discuss how we need to renegotiate trust amidst the AI disruptions. Then, we will talk about what we need to create a safe future for all of us in a panel about trust, governance, ethics, and AI safety. Finally, we will focus on the value of localization. Our future really depends on us being able to articulate that very clearly to all the stakeholders involved. So it is such a critical topic for our industry. Now, some very quick housekeeping rules. The conference runs from today until Wednesday from 4 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Central European Summer Time every day. If you join Zoom, please ask your questions via the Q&A functionality. If you join through YouTube, please use the chat to ask your questions. We will try to reply to as many questions as possible, but we cannot promise that we will be able to tackle all of them. You can always go to the think tank website, ailocthinktank.com, and send us your questions through the Ask the Think Tank form so that we can share the insights with the whole community. You can also visit our insights section where we share fresh insights on how AI is impacting what we do and beyond, and our resources center where our members are curating content that is worth your time. Remember that the conference sessions will be available on YouTube immediately after the event, so you will be able to check those there as well. Now, without further ado, I'll give the floor to Jota to introduce our keynote speaker for today.
Thank you so much, Belén, and good afternoon, everyone, from me as well, or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to ThoughtCon. It is my honor to be introducing the keynote speaker for the first day of our event. But before I do that, I want to steal a minute to just take the opportunity to thank Belén and Marina, the two co-founders of our think tank that I'm so proud to be a member of. Their enthusiasm is really contagious, as is the drive of the rest of the think tank members, which is what really made this event possible. So Aaron, Andrea, Balázs, Bridget, Coral, Gabriel, Helena, Johan, John, Libor, Marina, Marta, Miguel, Stavrula, and Veronica, it's a pleasure to exchange ideas with you and learn from you and your perspective of the industry. What we've really built here today in only 3 months, no less, is a gathering of people who refuse to be passive observers in the transformation that is taking place all around us. All of us, translators, researchers, developers, service providers, educators, thinkers, we are here to find out what it means to do meaningful work in a world that is moving faster than our frameworks can keep up with, as Maria herself puts it. And as Belén said, the theme of this first day is the future, and we begin approaching it by looking in the past, by looking to the lessons that history has to teach us, because in order to understand where it is we're going, we first need to understand how change works, which is why I'm so excited to introduce our keynote speaker, Maria Zarifi, a historian and philosopher of science and senior researcher in the Department of Sociology at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and most importantly to me, a dear friend, my oldest friend. Maria has worked at various universities in Greece, Germany, and Italy, and has spent her career studying, among other things, what happens when scientific expertise is met with upheaval. Her research focuses on the intersection of science, politics, and society, and her most recent work is on how experts constructed and communicated uncertainty during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, she's here to talk to us about how knowledge and trust function in periods of change. She will explore this using examples from history to explain how societies have previously navigated moments when new technologies have disrupted established forms of knowledge, professional authority, and social trust. So we can conclude what this means for us, now that machines have started performing cognitive tasks like translation. I really hope this talk will help us all better understand how expertise is redefined in the era of AI and provide us with a new lens to see ourselves professionally. I personally could not have thought of a better way to kick off this conference. There will be time for questions at the very end, so please post them in the Q&A and we will address them then. But in the meantime, please join me in welcoming Maria Zarifi. Maria, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much, Belén, and all of the core members of the think tank for this invitation. It is a real pleasure to open this exciting and timely conference, and I hope my talk will offer some meaningful food for thought over the next 3 days. Jota, a special thank you to you for bringing me into contact with this remarkable group, for the long and thoughtful conversations we have shared about the challenges and the anxieties of the AI era, and for your generous introduction. Now, please let me share my screen. Can you see the full screen?
Yes, Maria, all looks good. You can go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm delighted to be here with you today and to reflect together to some of the pressing questions raised by the rapid development of artificial intelligence, questions that leave many of us deeply concerned about our future, not only as experts, but also as human beings endowed with free will, judgment, and distinct ways of thinking. When I began writing this talk, I had a particular intention in mind. I wrote it, wanting it to be historically grounded and philosophically suggestive. Not because history provides really ready-made answers to the problems we face today, but because it offers something perhaps more valuable, a way of thinking critically about moments when knowledge, expertise, and trust become unsettled. Moments such as the one we're living through today. Artificial intelligence has entered many professional domains with remarkable speed. For language experts, translators, interpreters, subtitles, dubbing professionals, this transformation raises questions that go beyond technical adaptation. What is at stake is not only the introduction of new tools, it is a transformation of the conditions under which linguistic knowledge is produced, interpreted, and trusted. Such moments tend to produce narratives that oscillate between enthusiasm and anxiety. We often hear that AI revolutionizes everything, that it will replace human expertise, that it will soon surpass human intelligence. But as a political theorist, Langdon Winner argued in his influential book, Autonomous Technology, of 1977, such visions are sustained by a powerful myth: the belief that machines evolve autonomously according to their own internal logic and impose themselves upon society almost as if they were beyond human control. Therefore, he calls it autonomous technology. Yet, technologies never exist outside human contexts. They are embedded in social and cultural systems, into institutions, infrastructures, and human choices. As the Australian scholar Kate Crawford argues in her book Atlas of AI of 2021, artificial intelligence is neither purely artificial nor purely intelligent. It is instead a profoundly material and social phenomenon built from natural resources, human labor, political decisions, cultural imaginaries, logistical infrastructures, and historically situated classifications. In other words, AI is not simply a technological object, it is a socio-technical system, and the way we speak about it matters. As AI researcher and thinker Pablo Sanguinetti has recently argued, artificial intelligence is also shaped by the metaphors and narratives through which we describe it. These narratives do not merely reflect reality, they actively shape it by informing how societies imagine the future of AI, how engineers design it, how institutions regulate it, and how professionals come to integrate it into their work. If we imagine AI as an autonomous force destined to replace human intelligence, we risk adopting a deterministic narrative in which professional agency appears to fade and human choice seems increasingly constrained. History, however, suggests a reflective perspective. Technological revolutions do not simply introduce new tools. They unsettled and reconfigure the fragile relationship between truth, trust, and expertise. To explore this process, I would like to turn to two historical paradigms that reveal how societies have navigated moments of profound technological change and how, in doing so, they have been compelled to redefine knowledge, authority, and responsibility. The first paradigm regards the vaccination and the problem of trust. In 1796, the English physician Edward Jenner proposed a radical and for many deeply counterintuitive idea that smallpox, a devastating and often fatal disease, could be prevented by deliberately introducing biological material from another similar disease into the human body. He arrived at this insight through careful observation, noting that milkmaids who had come into contact with cowpox while milking cows seemed to be protected from smallpox. Jenner hypothesized that inoculating an individual with material from cowpox pustules could confer a degree of protection against smallpox. His hypothesis has subsequently confirmed, and in 1798, his findings he published his findings presenting the positive results of what came to be known as vaccination. At the time, however, this idea did not immediately inspire confidence. Today, vaccinations appear scientifically self-evident. Yet, in its early moment, it represented a profound epistemological paradox: the idea that health could be achieved through controlled exposure to disease. It is therefore not surprising that the first vaccination campaigns triggered widespread hesitation. Public debates quickly emerged among physicians, clergy, political authorities, and ordinary citizens, each attempting to make sense of a practice that challenged established understandings of the body, disease, and the natural order. Some critics faced the contamination of the human body with animal material. Some critics feared the contamination of the human body with animal material. Others questioned whether such an intervention violated divine or natural law. Satirical drawings, such as this one you see on the slide, from the early 19th century, even depicted vaccinated individuals gradually acquiring bovine characteristics. These reactions are often dismissed today as ignorance. Yet, they reveal something far more significant, that is, what we might call the social imagination of uncertainty. When societies encounter technologies whose mechanisms they cannot easily understand, uncertainty does not remain without content. It becomes populated with narratives, metaphors, fears, and expectations. Some of these narratives promise salvation and progress. Others warn of manipulation, danger, and loss of control. Scientific knowledge, therefore, rarely enters society as neutral information. It becomes the object of public debate, political negotiation, and reflection. Trust is not given, it is constructed. Over time, vaccination became one of the most successful public health interventions in history. But this success depended not only on scientific discovery, it relied on the gradual formation of institutional trust. Medical statistics, regulatory frameworks, public health infrastructures, and systems of professional accountability. 2 centuries later, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the world experienced a strikingly similar epistemological moment with the development of the mRNA vaccines. Once again, a new biomedical technology emerged rapidly under
I hear we have lost sound. Let us give us a moment to make sure.
What counts as reliable evidence when scientific understanding is still evolving? And how much uncertainty are we willing to tolerate in the name of innovation and collective protection? As in the early history of vaccination, uncertainty did not disappear. It was made visible, publicly negotiated, contested, and communicated in real time. Scientific expertise was no longer perceived as a stable authority, but as a dynamic process unfolding under pressure and subject to revision. The history of vaccination, therefore, reminds us of something crucial. Scientific knowledge rarely eliminates uncertainty. Rather, it organizes it, stabilizes it, and renders it governable. And this is precisely where trust becomes inseparable from institutions. Trust does not emerge spontaneously. It is built through structures that mediate uncertainty. That is, through public health systems, regulatory frameworks, protocols of testing and approval, and mechanisms of transparency and accountability. Regulation, in this sense, is not simply a technical or bureaucratic response. It is a fundamental way through which societies seek to navigate uncertainty, to negotiate risk, and to render scientific innovation socially acceptable and politically politically legitimate. Trust, therefore, emerges not when uncertainty disappears, but when societies develop institutions and regulatory frameworks capable of managing it by making it visible, accountable, and to some extent shared. Let's move to the second paradigm. The second historical paradigm concerns machines and the transformation of labor. During the Industrial Revolution, mechanized production began to transfer skills that had once been embodied in human workers into mechanical systems. Tasks that required years of training, dexterity, and experiential knowledge were gradually encoded into machines. For skilled artisans, this transformation was deeply unsettling. Machines appeared capable of reproducing forms of expertise that had long been considered uniquely human. That is, the skills acquired through apprenticeship, practice, and embodied experience. In the early 19th century, groups of English textile workers, known as the Luddites, began destroying newly introduced mechanical looms. Popular memory often portrays them as irrational enemies of technological progress. Yet historians have shown that the Luddites were not opposed to technology itself. What they resisted was the social reorganization of labor that accompanied mechanization, the transfer of skilled artisanal knowledge into machines increasingly controlled by factory owners. Their protests, therefore, were not simply acts of resistance. They were expressions of a deeper concern, one that remains strikingly relevant today. Who controls knowledge? Who benefits from technological innovation? And whose expertise becomes obsolete? 2 centuries later, these questions return in a new form. When machines begin to reproduce not manual, but cognitive skills, writing, translating, summarizing, interpreting, we're confronted with a new and perhaps more unsettling question. What remains for humans to do? For many professionals today, this question is not abstract. It is experienced as a concrete concern about displacement, transformation, and the future of work. History, however, shows that societies did not remain passive in the face of such disruptions. During and after the Industrial Revolution, a series of concrete measures were gradually introduced to respond to the profound reorganization of labor. New labor laws were established to regulate working conditions, limit working hours, and prohibit the most extreme forms of exploitation, including child labor. Trade unions emerged as collective bodies capable of negotiating wages and defending workers' rights. Systems of vocational training and public education expanded, allowing workers to acquire new skills adapted to changing technological environments. At the same time, professional standards and forms of certification were introduced in many fields, helping to redefine and protect certain types of expertise. Later, in the 20th century, welfare systems and social protection, such as unemployment benefits and social insurance, were developed precisely to absorb the shocks produced by technological and economic change. These measures did not eliminate inequality or conflict, but they demonstrate something crucial. Technological transformation was accompanied by institutional effort to redistribute its costs, to protect workers, and to redefine the value of human expertise within new economic structures. In this sense, regulation is not simply a technical response to innovation. It is a social and political negotiation about what kinds of work, knowledge, and expertise a society chooses to protect, redefine, or allow to disappear. Artificial intelligence possesses extraordinary capabilities for processing vast volumes of data at remarkable speed. In many domains, this capacity is not only useful, it is transformative. Yet the output of such processes does not necessarily reproduce what we might call the labyrinth structure of human intelligence. Human thinking rarely proceeds in straight lines. It moves through associations, metaphors, memories, emotions, imagination, and intuition, often all at once. Large language models are trained on extensive corpora of human texts. In this sense, they function as mirrors. They reflect patterns that already exist in the data on which they have been trained. This is why AI-generated texts often display recognizable stylistic forms and recurring ways of structuring ideas. Their coherence can be striking, their fluency at times remarkable, and yet this coherence often follows statistical regularities rather than lived experience. Language, however, is not only a system of probabilities, it is also a space of creativity, plasticity, and invention. Human linguistic expression does not simply reproduce patterns, it transforms them. It generates new meanings, new metaphors, new ways of articulating experience. Languages evolve not because they calculate, but because communities imagine. This is not to deny the extraordinary capabilities of AI systems. On the contrary, they already extend human capacities in unprecedented ways, that is, processing information, connecting domains, and producing outputs at a scale and speed no individual could match. But these systems do not experience the world. They do not inhabit time, memory, or embodiment in the way humans do. Their knowledge is not grounded in lived experience, but in patterns extracted from data. And this difference matters because it reminds us that coherence is not the same as understanding, that the fluency is not the same as meaning. If then both intuition and reasoning can to some extent be simulated by machines, we are led to a deeper question. What kind of knowledge are we dealing with? And how has philosophy helped us think about this distinction in the past? This is where an old philosophical debate becomes relevant. The debate between empiricism and rationalism, two traditions that together formed the epistemological framework of what we call, the historians of science we call, the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries. This revolution marked a turning point that led to the emergence of the modern world as we know it today. What is important here is not only the historical context, but a shift in perspective, a profound epistemological turn. Philosophy gradually moved its attention away from the object of knowledge and toward the subject who knows. The central question is, how do we come to know something? What are the mechanisms through which we come to know? In this sense, philosophy began to follow science, not by repeating its methods, but by reflecting on them. How does the human mind operate when it seeks knowledge? What role do observation, experience, and reasoning play? And perhaps most importantly, can knowledge ever be certain? Within this framework, two major traditions, as I said, emerge. The empiricist thinkers such as Francis Bacon, John Locke, and David Hume, which are the classicist empiricists as we call them, argued that knowledge begins with experience. Observation, experiment, and sensory perception became the foundations of scientific inquiry. Through processes such as induction, which is the process by moving from particular observations to general conclusions, knowledge could gradually be constructed. Take something as simple as an apple. What we perceive is not the apple as a whole, but a combination of sensory impressions, red, round, smooth, sweet. The mind then combines these elements to construct the idea of the object, the apple. Knowledge in this sense emerges through a process of reduction and recomposition, what we, the philosopher of science, call induction. It's not a term that the empiricists use, and it doesn't matter if you don't remember the terminology. Just follow the logic. But this approach also has its limits. The mind can combine elements freely. For instance, a horse and wings. And we can form from these two ideas, as the empiricist calls it, these two elements, a winged horse. Yet, such an idea has no empirical grounding. It does not correspond to reality. It may be imaginative, but it does not produce knowledge. And here we begin to recognize something familiar. Contemporary AI systems operate in a strikingly similar way. They recombine patterns drawn from vast datasets. And while the results may be coherent, even impressive, they can also produce outputs that are awkward, misleading, or simply untrue, precisely because they lack grounding in lived experience. Rationalist philosophers, on the other hand, approached the problem differently. Thinkers such as René Descartes argued that certain aspects of reality cannot be derived from sensory experience alone. There are properties, such as extension in space, that belong to objects independently of how we perceive them. In this view, knowledge depends on structures of reason. The world is understood as a network of causal relations, a structured order that the mind is capable of grasping. Causality is not just something we observe, it is something through which we make sense of reality. What becomes clear, however, is that neither experience nor reason alone is sufficient. Human knowledge emerges through their interaction, but also through something more. Human thinking is not only logical, not only empirical. It is shaped by memory, by emotion, by cultural contexts, by imagination, and by lived experience, again, over time. We do not simply process information, we interpret it, stimulate it, give it meaning within a broader horizon of values and understanding. This is where the difference with artificial systems becomes more visible. AI can process data at extraordinary scale. It can recombine patterns with remarkable speed, but it cannot experience the world. It does not feel, remember, or exist within time. And this matters because knowledge is not only a matter of corrections, it is also a matter of meaning, of transcending experience through moments of insight, those eureka instances in which understanding emerges. The old philosophical question returned to us today in a new form. What becomes of truth when knowledge is produced primarily through data and probabilistic models? On what grounds can we trust such knowledge and those who produce and use it? And what kind of expertise is possible when reasoning, experience, and meaning are no longer unified within the same cognitive system? The philosopher Karl Popper offers a powerful way of thinking about scientific knowledge and the problem of truth. For Popper, science does not progress by proving theories correct, but by subjecting them to constant testing and possible refutation. Scientific knowledge, therefore, is always provisional, open to revision rather than fixed as certainty. He also challenged the idea that knowledge advances through a simple accumulation of evidence. New theories, he argued, do not merely refine earlier ones. They often introduce entirely new concepts that cannot be fully translated into the language of previous theories. A well-known example is the transition from Newtonian physics to Einstein's theory of relativity. The latter, the Einstein's theory, did not simply improve the former, Newton's theory. It redefined fundamental concepts such as space, time, and motion. It offered a radically different way of conceptualizing reality. This is why Popper preferred to speak not of truth, but of verisimilitude, which is the truth likeness. Scientific theories do not capture reality as it is. Rather, they approach it asymptotically. Some theories correspond more closely to structure of reality than others, therefore asymptotically. Even if none can claim absolute truth, they just approach the truth. They're not identified themselves with the truth. They don't conquer the absolute truth. It's impossible, Popper says. This perspective is particularly useful when thinking about AI-generated knowledge. Many outputs produced by large language models appear coherent, structured, and convincing. They often resemble well-formed knowledge, and yet their relation to truth may remain uncertain. They may approximate truth. They may be plausible, persuasive, even useful, without necessarily being reliable. This brings us back to the central tension of our discussion. If knowledge is no longer grounded in certainty, but in degrees of approximation, if what we encounter are not truths, but versions that resemble truth, then the question is no longer only what is true, but also what and whom do we trust? For this reason, debates about artificial intelligence increasingly return to one central issue: regulation. But regulation in this context is not only a technical or legal matter. It is deeply epistemological. It concerns how we deal with knowledge that is uncertain, probabilistic, and often opaque. If this is the case, then the question of trust becomes inseparable from the questions of how knowledge is produced, validated, and governed. History reminds us that no major technological transformation has unfolded without new forms of governance. Industrialization led to labor laws, modern medicine to systems of pharmaceutical regulation, nuclear technology to international oversight and control. Artificial intelligence will not be an exception. The challenge, therefore, is not only the technological innovation itself, it is the creation of institutional frameworks capable of managing uncertainty by ensuring transparency, accountability, justice, and above all, meaningful human oversight. In this sense, regulation becomes a way of stabilizing knowledge in conditions where certainty is no longer possible. It is a way of organizing trust. To move forward, we must also rethink how we speak about AI. We must shift our focus from technology itself and put it our focus onto the human, the social, the institutional structures that shape it. From technological determinism to human choice and responsibility, from abstract futures, whether utopian or apocalyptic, to the concrete realities we are already living, and from systems that appear autonomous to communities that design, regulate, and use them. This shift of focus is what we all propose we should do. And allow me to close with a reflection. History shows that moments of technological transformation rarely eliminate expertise. They redefine it. From vaccination to industrialization, from scientific revolutions to contemporary AI, the same question returns: not whether knowledge survives, but how it is transformed and under what conditions it is still be trusted. For language experts, the emergence of AI does not necessarily signal the disappearance of linguistic expertise, but it does require a deeper reflection on what that expertise truly consists of. Perhaps then the question is not whether machines can produce language. The question is, what makes language meaningful? Is it structure? Is it coherence? Or is it something more? Interpretation, context, imagination, and the lived experience of those who use it. Human language is not only a system of rules, it is a living practice. It evolves through creativity, through ambiguity, through what is said, and also through what remains unspoken, imagined, or culturally embedded. And this is where something essential remains at stake. Truth and language is never purely mechanical. It is always mediated through interpretation, through context, through human experience. And trust, whether in science, in technology, or in language, is not given. It is constructed, it is negotiated, and it is sustained through institutions, through responsibility, and through shared norms. So perhaps the final question we were left with is not whether AI will transform our professions. It already has. The question is, how will we choose to live, to work, and to think within this transformation? And what forms of truth, trust, and expertise do we want to carry forward into this rapidly changing world? Thank you very much for your attention. And I can't wait to answer to your questions.
Maria, thank you so much for this thought-provoking talk. You've given us a lot to think about. I particularly love, I would say, what you said about it's our choice. It's a choice that society makes. What happens to our future, it's our choice. And that is really, really important to remember. I also understand governance is crucial. And thankfully, things have already started happening on that front, although we have a long way to go. I do want to ask you a question that I've been thinking a lot about. Actually, a lot of people have been thinking about. It's a worry that many of people at my age, I would say, have once the older generation, in the case of translation specifically in our setting, once the older generation that learned how to translate without AI retires, what will the new generation do? The ones that never had that foundation, that never gained enough experience by translating without AI, how will they be able to govern these tools and recognize where they go wrong?
Well, thank you very much, Jota. This is a really tough question. And the short answer, it is hardly. They can hardly recognize something wrong in the AI translation if they are not trained with the traditional tools that our generation has been trained, or older generations, okay? But it seems that this could be, let's say, create not this problem could be, let's say, softened, if I may use this word, by including these people into what you already do in those think tanks that you discuss, that you are bringing these people into contact with experienced and people of the profession, that you can teach them or show them or communicate them your knowledge in order to gain to some extent the tools that they didn't have the chance to get by or through their education. And of course, if they're willing to do it, if this generation is not interested in getting involved in this kind of process, then I don't know that they are in a position to distinguish something wrong, something or from something right. So to integrate these people, to communicate with this generation, with such generation, it not only enrich the skills of these people, but also from the older generation will gain some new skills or learn some new skills in being in contact with these new generations. I mean, it is a two-way interaction. It's an interaction. It's not we, the oldest, we should teach the younger ones, but also we can learn from the younger ones. The key is that we all, who belong to a profession, we should discuss and decide what we tolerate doing the AI, what are the limits that the AI should have in order to have to keep our profession sustainable, in order to have a future, in order to continue working in this domain, in this discipline, in a constructive way and in a different way as the AI. I'll
Thank
stop
you.
here.
Yes, there is actually a talk, I think, tomorrow on training, which is
Oh,
basically what you talked about and how we train the future generation and
okay.
translators, that I will look forward to that as well. There's a lot of congratulations in the chat.
Thank you.
And I don't think we have time for more than one question, actually. So I'll
Maybe let's
ask
take one question. Yeah, I am monitoring here, Jota, the Q&A, and we have a very nice question from Anna Chemali, who congratulates you on the brilliant presentation. I can only agree with that. And she's asking, Maria, how do you see the concentration of wealth by the AI developers having some defining consequences for the future of our society?
Yeah, and another tough question. I mean, we saw the same thing in history, in the past. I mean, as I said, the Ludids, they revolted against the owners of the factories because they had the wealth and they were doing whatever they wanted. They revolted. They created unions in order to put their own rules, to regulate the profession, their skills, in other ways, according to their wills. So, of course, it is not an easy thing to do, and it's not something that it could be changed from one day to another, to the next one. I mean, it takes time, and I think what your profession, what my profession, because even if I don't belong to the language experts, also my profession faces similar challenges. So this means that we should discuss, and we should try to understand what is going on, and to form a shared an agenda that we can share it with those who put the regulations. I mean, from the top to the or from the bottom to the top, if you understand what I mean, if we're in a position to do so. But I think we are. I mean, we are a part of the society. Yeah, and we should do our best in order to explain that our professions are an asset for the society. It's not the machine, the products from the machines, the society. It's also ours, or a combination, or a good combination of the two. So about the wealth, I don't know. This is a big question, and a serious question, and I don't think I have another answer.
Thank you
Yes,
so much.
thank
Sorry.
you. Thank you,
I don't
Jota.
think I think we have run out of time, actually. I see, I think in the chat people have put some questions, but we have run out of time already. So I don't want to risk the next, still time from the next panel. So with that, I would like to thank you again for your time, Maria, and for your inspiring talk. We have a lot to think about, especially on the how we can help construct this trust and what form this institutional trust needs to take, and the guardrails that we need to put in place. I'm sure we'll be discussing a lot about that afterwards. And with that, I just want to thank you again on behalf of everyone.
Thank you very
entire
much
think
for the
tank.
honor and the chance you gave me to put my thoughts on paper for you and to interact with you. Thank you very much indeed.
This is truly
And
inspiring.
have a splendid 3-day conference. I wish you have a
Thank you
great
so
conference.
much.
Thank you.
I will pass on to Belén now, who will be moderating the next panel, which is on a very similar topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Bye
so
from me.
much, Jutta and Maria. I was chatting with my colleagues and saying that I feel smarter right now after attending this presentation. So thank you so much, Maria, for making us smarter and sharing such an amazing wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much. So now I would like to ask my panelists to be back on stage. So Dan, Veronica, Coral, and Balazs, if you want to show your screen. Thank you so much. Before we jump into the discussion, I'm just gonna run very short poll. related to this topic. I hope you can see it now on your screen on Zoom. So as AI reshapes translation workflows, how do you think professional trust and authority are best maintained? After what you've heard from Maria, and before we jump into this very interesting panel that we have ahead of us, just to get some of your thoughts from the audience. I will give you a few more seconds. Such a difficult topic, honestly. As Maria said, very tough questions, but very important discussion to have. So let me see if participants reply to the question. Almost 50% of people replied. Share your thoughts with us, and then we will jump right into the panel. Okay. Okay, so I think, okay, now no one else is replying. Well, yes, actually, yes. People taking their time. I think we should be good. I'm going to finalize the voting, and let's see what our audience thinks about this topic. So I hope you can see the results now. So almost half of our audience thinks that trust must be renegotiated collectively. So no single approach works right now. And then the second more voted option is by embracing new hybrid human-machine roles proactively, and then by demonstrating value through storytelling and measurable outcomes, and through stricter governance frameworks and standards. So I think everyone thinks that we need to talk about it. It's not something that is solved and easily solved. So that's great, because that's why we are here today. So actually, let me introduce the next panel. The title of today's panel is Governance, AI Safety, and Human-Centered AI Implementation for Localization. I think we've all heard a lot of people talking about AI safety, AI governance, responsible AI, and so on and so forth. But do we really know what all that actually means in theory and practice? In order to untangle this very complex topic, we've brought a stellar panel of speakers who will share their insights with us today. In alphabetical order, we have Balázs Kiss, founder of a large language tech company and a compliance expert who brings 3 decades of experience with natural language processing, translation, localization, and publishing. Then we have Coral Diez Carbajo, digital transformation strategist. She brings tons of hands-on experience in designing AI-driven workflows in our industry for many different customers. Then we have Dan Taber, who is an AI researcher and strategy leader. He actually has a PhD in epidemiology, which I find very fascinating and made me think whether AI could be considered an epidemic. I don't know, Dan, maybe you can tell us about that. He's been working on AI safety for over a decade now being the head of research and responsible programming, trust and safety in an international big tech company. He also has his own newsletter on Substack called The Unlearning Curve. So please go and subscribe to his newsletter, because it's really interesting and worth reading. And last but not least, we have Veronica Hilag. She's a generative AI advisor, founder, award-winning AI product leader, and creator of the very successful AI YouTube channel, Hey AI. Again, if you are not subscribed to Veronica's channel, please go right now to YouTube and subscribe to Hey AI. Now, before we jump into the panel questions, I wanted to ask Veronica to do a brief intro on the topic, because I think the terminology is a little bit blurry for most of us mortals. So maybe Veronica can do a short presentation, and then we can jump into the questions.
Yeah. Belén, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I think this is going to be a really fantastic conversation. And when we started to talk about having this panel, the first question that came out of it was, what does AI governance, AI safety, AI responsible AI, like what does all of that mean? Because it sounds like a lot of really fancy words. So we're going to talk about that today. It's probably no stranger to you, but your team is probably using AI. They're cutting costs, they're optimizing workflows, they're boosting productivity. It's everywhere, and that's great in a lot of different scenarios. But there's a question that's not being asked enough. Is anyone asking what can go wrong? Who's responsible when it does? Most companies are only looking at one half of this coin. They're looking at AI development, getting faster models that are more precise, shipping more, cutting costs, optimizing, increasing margins. They're all focused on this one half. But there's a whole other side that's just as critical. Who's making sure this is safe? Who's making sure the risks of adding AI doesn't overweigh the benefits? And the way that I kind of look at it is it's like a penny or a coin. You know, you have heads and tails and both are just as important. But right now what's kind of going on is we're just focusing on the heads side. The problem is most people don't think about that other side of the coin until something goes terribly wrong. There's a data breach, a biased output that goes public and costs you revenue. Like, for example, a car dealership in Florida selling a $70,000 SUV for $1 through their AI chatbot. That was a real thing that happened. You will have issues with your clients asking you how their content is being used for AI training. And many people don't have an answer to that. So we want to make sure you, if you're choosing to implement AI, have a very clear answer and can feel confident in what you're deploying. So really the last slide here, AI governance, AI safety, responsible AI, all sound really heavy, but it's actually really simple and all of you can understand it. Who decides what AI can do and how you make sure it's done right? It's the plan. Who's making the decisions? What are the guardrails? What could go wrong? And what do you do when that happens? Because if you don't have those answers, but you're implementing AI, you're forgetting 50% of that coin. A lot of people, they have hope for what AI can do, but they're not protecting themselves from something that can go wrong. So that's what we're here to talk about today. I'm honestly honored to be among all of these people, and let's get into it.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Really so simple and so difficult at the same time. I wonder how many companies out there have answered that simple question that you posed. What can AI do and what can go wrong? And what are your guardrails, right? So thank you so much for making this concept, which seems complex, but it's actually very simple to understand. Okay, so now let's jump into the first question that I have that I would like to direct to Dan first, which is, what does responsible AI governance actually look like on the ground, not in a policy document, but actually in real life?
Yeah, honestly, for most organizations, it's very messy. And I think that needs to be said out loud because, you know, it's very easy to idealize responsible AI governance as everybody knowing the rules and knowing what's the right thing to do. But it's often a lot messier than that. That's certainly the end state that you want, but actually getting there on the ground requires a lot of hard conversations. And that's what really stood out to me when I first started in the field several years ago was there's a lot of basic questions you have to answer when you start out, like, what are the AI systems we're most concerned about? What are the harms in those systems we're most concerned about? How do you measure those harms? You know, what's our risk tolerance? What threshold are we willing to accept? And who makes that decision? These can sound simple, but once you bring people together to try to answer them, you'll find there's a lot of differences of opinion because teams have different priorities, different risk tolerances, different senses of what's good enough. So a lot of figuring this out on the ground is just having those hard conversations. So I think that's one angle to it. Another angle is then how do you make it an actual natural part of teams and the individual's daily workflow? Because you don't want responsible AI to be this thing that just happens every once in a while, or you think like, oh, there's that AI governance thing I was supposed to do. Like you want it to be naturally baked into how teams normally operate. This can be through tools such as like having a model registry that documents all the models that your organization uses, documentation like model cards that can list out like the purpose of a model and the risks and limitations that go with it. And having these sort of tools and systems and processes can make it seem like a more natural part of teams' day-to-day work, so they're not just doing it when they think of it. And then when you can get to that state where it's just a natural part of workflow, then the beauty is that governance becomes something that's just invisible. It's just a natural part of how the organization operates. But getting there is really, really tricky. And it takes, I think, a lot longer than organizations think. And I'd say the organizations that are able to make the most progress are often the ones that are willing to kind of work through that messy middle period when you're answering some of those questions.
Yeah, that's a very good point because we sometimes those who don't know too much about governance, we believe that governance is like maybe like a static document that says what you can do, what you cannot do, but it's actually about talking to people, understanding their priorities, and getting buy-in actually from all these different teams with all these different needs that then is aligned with what the company business needs are, what the regulations are saying, and so on and so forth. So it's really almost like a facilitator role somehow, paired with expertise and paired with frameworks and processes that actually can give some shape to this mess, as you said at the beginning. So thank you for sharing that, Dan. And a follow-up question to this one to you would be, where do you see the biggest gap between how organizations talk about responsible AI or AI ethics and all that, and how they actually practice it? So is there a gap there between the theory and the practice?
Yeah, I noticed an interesting gap when I was first getting started several years ago. I was doing research, talking to different organizations, and I noticed they kind of fell into two different camps. They're the ones that were making lots of noise, like they were issuing these big public statements, these bold statements about their ethical principles. But then I would talk to people inside the organization, and I would hear that they weren't really doing it very much. But on the flip side, there were organizations that were being very quiet about it. They were not issuing any bold statements, but I would talk to them, and they were actually doing quite a bit. I'll never forget one company in particular, a well-known tech company. They were doing a lot to try to operationalize responsible AI in the organization, but they were being very secretive about it, and they're willing to talk to me about what they were doing. But I had to swear that I wouldn't tell anyone about it, and it's not because they were like hiding any trade secrets. They just said we want to be doing it for the right reasons. We don't want to come across as though we're trying to get publicity out of it. I'd say there are three things that I think separate companies like that from the ones that are being very public but not actually doing as much. One that I think you touched on is, to what extent are they bringing together people from across the organization? Because it's not a topic that any team owns. Like, it's not just a legal issue or a product issue or a technology issue. You really have to bring in stakeholders from across the organization to take it seriously. A second thing is, to what extent are they actually baking it into just how the organization as a whole operates? This can include things like having an annual goal related to responsible AI, or having it part of individuals' performance reviews, because things like that signal that you're actually taking it seriously and it's part of the company's natural rhythm of business, as opposed to being kind of this standalone initiative that's just an island off by itself. But I'd say the third thing, and probably the most important, is to what extent they're willing to just have those hard conversations. Because inevitably there's going to be compromises you're going to have to make, even between different ethical principles, where one goes against another. Like, as a concrete example, if you want to measure whether your AI systems are fair or not, you may need demographic data to do that. But to collect demographic data from users, that could potentially infringe on their privacy. So then it becomes a data privacy versus fairness issue. So I think the companies really taking it seriously are actually having those conversations and navigating those tensions. Whereas the ones that aren't taking it seriously, it's not that they don't care, but they may kind of gloss over those tensions and kind of paper over them with these general principles rather than having the hard conversations.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's almost like a spider web, there's so many ramifications when you start talking about these topics, and so many things that are intertwined somehow. So very, very interesting. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I also wanted to hear Balazs' thoughts on this topic, being the co-founder of one of the biggest translation management systems in the industry. A lot of responsible AI governance and everything comes into play. So would you like to share some thoughts on this last question, Balazs? Unmute yourself first. Great.
I need to learn how to unmute myself after 10 years. Thank you, Belén. Yeah, I will try to break this down and bring it closer to the language industry, if you will. So interesting, you would say that I'm a co-founder of one of the largest translation management system makers in the industry. The reality is that these companies, some of the well-known language technology companies and some of the well-known language service providers, translation companies, are also rather small and medium-sized businesses. Now, medium-sized and small businesses face the issue of especially if you just create a company, you learn a lot of things the hard way. Why? Because you don't have not the scope that you can span with the resources that you have? Can you pay attention to all of the standards, regulations, considerations out there? Do you have a way to learn about them? So back in the day when we were kind of when we learned about the quality management standards, then the information security standards, for many years we thought that, oh no, this is the playground of huge corporations, and in some way a small business would think that with good reason, because these things are formulated in a way that assume a large organization, a large institution. When I started dealing with compliance, that's one of my professions by chance and by necessity. I went to my first compliance conference. MemoQ back then had 80 people, and heard questions asked timidly. May I ask a question? I work for a very small company, only 5,000 employees. And I went there with 80 people behind me. So the thing is that you don't think as a small business that any kind of governance, AI governance, information security, whatever is accessible to you, available to you. And this is why we need to break it down. So this brings it closer. Just give you a few examples here. Language service companies face challenges like you need to set up a translation automation that involves a large language model or an AI agent or two. And then, okay, but when you deal with the large language model, where does it come from? Where do your data goes? Where do your data go? Who owns the large language model? Who has benefits from what you are doing with it? Who else sees the data? What do they do with it? And so on and so on and so forth. This is where awareness begins. Who else sees what you do? Who owns? Who benefits from what you are trying to do with the AI? Or there's a false sense of a kind of availability or a false sense of AI technologies being democratic in a way that, for instance, desktop publishing became democratic in the late 80s. With agentic AI involved, especially with agentic AI involved, my experience is that translation automation workflows are as diverse as the translation tasks out there. So and there's temptation, that this temptation itself is the risk, that a single LLM can figure it out with a single prompt. And most of the time, this is not the case. We had a wonderful workshop last week here in Budapest, where two of the largest language service providers in Hungary were introducing the kind of AI-based workflows that they've been using. And what turns out is you need to engineer a translation automation workflow. It's a delicate mix of automated and human components, and you need to plan, you need to engineer it. Maybe AI can help with that as well, but it's not very simple. It's not a single prompt. It's not a task for ChatGPT. You often need much more specialized tools, and many companies do not know that. And when it comes to software makers, because the boundary between AI-enabled, technology-savvy language service providers and software makers is blurring. Everybody is now using AI for coding. But then when you introduce coding, you need to hand over some control to the AI that does the coding and potentially controls the development environment. And this can cause a lot of damage. And also, AI agents. Everybody has heard about OpenClaw. The information I'm presenting here comes from MemoQ's Chief Information Security Officer, Adam Klar. On OpenClaw, there are almost 1,500 agents that were built with malicious payload. And traditional security scanning systems cannot detect AI agents that were built with malicious payload and with malicious intent. The interesting third gap that I've seen with this is that the guardrails that you build around, for instance, coding function of a very well-known AI system, is that the guardrails turned out to be significantly dumber than the model itself. So they look for patterns in the commands that the AI is trying to issue to the development environment, and the AI can circumvent that within minutes, maybe in seconds. So it's something that the industry is still learning. There are huge gaps, even without boasting everything. And the most boasting about governance and ethical processes, those who boast about conscious governance and a lot of awareness usually consider that they don't know a whole lot of things, because it's not possible to know a lot of things at this point. My last comment here is a trauma that I had at a compliance conference earlier this month. Was that it was a compliance conference. Compliance people are the guys who, mostly for larger companies, write the policies, do trainings on the policies. And these guys were using AI freely to write the policies, to update the policies, to create the training materials, to use them to communicate that to the people in the organization. And what they didn't do, they didn't check what kind of AI they are using. They didn't check who owns the AI, who benefits from the AI, where their data goes. And the irony here is that the compliance people are those guys who would insist that you need to do very careful third-party due diligence. You need to vet your suppliers, and you need to rush every larger client through the know your customer process. And this whole knowledge, this whole practice went out of the window when it came to selecting an AI model or another. Why do we vet everybody, and why don't we check the AI provider that we choose to use?
Yeah.
And luckily, some of my company's biggest clients do vet the AI and are very conscious about where and how they run the AI. But I don't want to use a lot of time. I could be here talking for 2 more weeks. So I will shut up now.
Thank you so much, Balázs. I think that last bit goes back to what Veronica was saying at the beginning, that we are asking what AI can do for us and like what can we do with AI, but we are not asking too often what can go wrong. So that's where the blind spot is. And I wanted to ask also Coral to share her thoughts on this because she has so many experience in actually operationalizing AI-driven workflows in our industry. So what have you learned, Coral, so far?
Yeah, thank you, Belén. Yeah, there's indeed so much to unpack. From my perspective, I see a huge disconnect between the high-level rhetoric of ethical AI and then the reality of the daily workflows. So if we look at this through the lens of an LSP, the biggest gap is treating governance as a compliance exercise instead of as a relational strategy. So it's important to note that the European AI Act, I'm going to talk about the AI Act quite a lot because of the topic of this panel. Even if it's not yet fully in force, it's being implemented step by step, and there's also going to be further changes as some measures are currently under discussion. But with the AI Act setting a legal framework, I see that many organizations are scrambling to check boxes related to risk categorization and transparency obligations. The AI Act is basically a product safety law that applies even outside the European Union. This means that if an AI system affects anyone in the European Union, the rules apply, no matter where that system was built or used. So, in my opinion, many LSPs focus on the legal what of the AI Act rather than on the practical how, but of building shared trust amongst project managers, employees of the LSP, clients. They often overlook the human-centered side of those requirements that are within the AI Act. I feel like some may talk about trustworthy AI to satisfy a client or a regulator, but they may not necessarily be investing in AI literacy or the upskilling needed to make those systems truly safe and effective for their teams. Some companies, and this is across all industries, promote AI solutions without first empowering their staff with a governance for dummies approach that makes technology accessible to everybody, even those without technical background. Then, if we look at it through the point of view of the translators, the gap in this talk versus practice in AI ethics, I think it's even more personal. The AI Act places a heavy emphasis on human oversight. This idea that the human must remain in control of the AI output. Organizations love to use the phrase human in the loop, which basically means having someone in the process who can take responsibility. But in practice, many translators feel, and I am not a translator myself, but I guess many translators feel that their professional authority is being reduced by workflows that prioritize speed over their expert judgments. I see also a significant gap between the promise of upskilling and the reality of whether translators are actually being provided with the tools and the trainings to be able to lead the AI transformation rather than just obey or follow it. And I also think that ethics is often discussed in abstract terms, but the practice usually misses the mark on human well-being. I think translators see a gap when ethical AI doesn't translate into shared practices that respect their expertise and their mental workload. In a hybrid human-machine environment, the translator's well-being and integrity, I think, can sometimes be relegated to a secondary place and put automation first. So I believe that true ethical practice isn't just about following the law. It's about creating accessible, transparent structures that actually can empower translators and all the humans in the process, project managers, whoever is there, so that we can practice a human oversight. That's actually what the AI Act demands. So this gap, in my opinion, will only close when we stop treating AI ethics as an abstract legal problem and start treating it as a concrete strategy to protect our professional values and the people that actually are doing the work.
Thank you so much, Coral. You are so spot on. And Veronica, I think you have a follow-up comment to this, so you want to say it out loud?
Oh, well, I was just thinking about Coral's comment about a gap about upskilling. There was actually a research paper that came out a couple of weeks ago that confirmed 78% of jobs created by AI in this next wave will require a master's degree. So that's pretty big gap. A lot of people don't have master's degrees, and even the master's degrees that you might have now likely are not going to translate to those new jobs being created. So it's just kind of shedding light on the hope that AI has versus likely the reality that it will give for a lot of people.
Yeah. Thank you so much for adding that, Veronica. And going back to Dan, when we talk about more practical stuff about implementing governance, I wanted to ask a question. So if a small agency with no dedicated tech team or governance legal team asks you for a one-page AI governance starter kit, what would be on it?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to this because that's basically how I got started. I was a one-person team within an organization with no tech team behind me. I think the thing I would lead with is you have to be crystal clear from the beginning about what you're trying to accomplish with governance. Because I've seen too many organizations kind of leap into creating frameworks or policies without a clear idea of like what their end goal is. Like for some organizations, it could be like preserving trust with their clients. Some may be concerned more about the quality of their output. Some may be primarily concerned with regulatory compliance. And depending on which of those it is, that's going to lead to three very different governance programs. So you want to be very clear upfront about what that goal is, so you're not building something that's not suited to your needs. I think a second thing is not trying to cover everything. It's tempting to try to like govern every single model or tool that's being used in an organization, but that's just not realistic. And you're likely to burn yourself out. More than likely, there's going to only be like 2 or 3 high-risk ones that you're going to want to put most of your effort into, and having some sort of framework to guide like what are the highest risk cases based on how they interact with your clients or how they affect your organization. And then I say the last one, this is probably the hardest, is you want to be able to map the entire ecosystem. And what I mean by that is that it's tempting to try to like fixate on individual models to govern, but it's usually not the model per se that's the problem, because a model is just one part of an overall pipeline that includes like how you're ingesting data from clients, how the model gets trained, how decisions are made based on the model output, and other downstream decisions and actions that happen. And potentially there can be multiple models interacting with each other along the way. So if you don't understand that overall ecosystem, then you're not in a good position to actually be able to say if the model does do harm, be able to intervene and know what to do, because you don't know where that harm really originated. It's not an easy thing to do, but if you can kind of develop a mental model for what that ecosystem looks like, then you're going to be so far ahead of most organizations and be in a much better place to actually be able to intervene if something goes wrong. And those foundations of like knowing what your goal is, knowing what those 2 or 3 high risk cases are, and then being able to map the ecosystem, that'll be the foundation for everything else that you build, I would say.
Such a great answer, Dan. Thank you so much. I think the last point that you mentioned, the third point, being able to map the whole ecosystem and where that AI workflow information travels is very difficult, especially in our industry, because there's so much content being translated and being put out there, and with different like workflows, one can be fully automated, what can be with human in the loop, what can be this and that, and it's like really understanding the impact of that. I think our industry is not really getting that right at this point, or at least I'm not seeing it myself. So thank you for making that very clear to us from your experience. Going back to Balazs, who also wanted to share some from your own experience creating this one pager or like basic checklist for governance starter package. Do you want to share a little bit more on that, Balazs?
Yeah, actually, it does come from some the experience that our companies learned the hard way. So, and one of the things that we need to keep in mind, and that I think this resonates with what Cora first mentioned, that this whole thing, and not just the governance part, but the entire use of AI part needs to be strategic. And one of the things that we need to remember with all this pressure, I wouldn't even use the word hype anymore, that AI is not our end; it's a means of us providing service to our various clients. And with that in mind, we need to be very clear on what AI we want to use for what purpose and how, in what way. And that is basically what AI governance also tries to cover, and this is what so-called AI policies are trying to cover. But if you work for a small business and want a checklist, I really try to come up with one based on the conversations that we had in the company earlier. The first thing is to be careful. If you want to be an early adapter, make sure that any untested system is sandboxed and tested before you actually put it to production. This may slow down your adoption, but it also mitigates the chance of things going catastrophically wrong. Allocate budget. So this is something I've already mentioned. AI capability is not for free. The models are not for free. Some companies are actually now, even if they or the users are on a flat fee subscription, they keep tracking their AI consumption, most of the time in tokens, for instance. And you also need to spend money and time on finding out where and how you will use it. And this includes the engineering of the workflow that includes the AI. So it's not for free. Number 3, you need to be very clear on what AI you use, for what and how. And in my companies, the policy uses a so-called whitelist. So you have a whitelist of systems and purposes that you can use it for. That's part of the governance framework. And everything that doesn't belong to this whitelist, either the purpose or the system, needs to go through an approval process. Number 4, keep being informed. So be always aware of specific safety and security risks that AI systems pose, and be always aware of where your AI systems come from, who owns them, where your data goes, who else benefits from them, who else sees the data when you use the system, and what they do with it. And number 5, always have a plan B. So what if the AI use goes wrong? This is something I keep saying, and it's becoming vulgar, but I still believe that the current generative AI systems are the single most unpredictable pieces of technology that humanity ever invented. And because of that, there are always surprises. Things can always go wrong. What happens? Because you still need to serve your client. So what happens if it goes wrong? How you will save face in business if it goes wrong? And the specific advice that could be counted as point 5A here, and that's my last point here. Do not forget about your human craft. Can you still do your work without AI? Because you might need to. So thank you. And again,
that's such a good, like that last point. Thank you so much, Belén. It's a very good reminder, because we are all relying on now AI to do my emails and my whatever summaries and articles. And what happens if that all goes down? Will you be able to continue doing this task or to translate without that support? That's a very existential threat for all of us right now. So let's not lose on those cognitive skills. Thank you so much for sharing, Balázs. Now, going back to Nick, I have a couple of questions for you. What are the 2 or 3 non-negotiables that any organization should have in place before deploying AI at all in any translation workflow or anything else?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first one's it's a very obvious thing that a lot of people are missing. And I co-wrote an article about this, Multilingual, if anyone has the chance to look at it. But companies and orgs really need to understand the risk tier of their content. I think our industry for too long has used the same workflows or even the same prices, no matter what kind of content it was. And that is not going to fly anymore with AI, because as we all know, not all translation is equal. Translating a marketing tagline is really different and has very different risks from translating a medical document. So AI needs to be applied very differently depending on the content. And it's very possible that you'll have 10, 15 different ways of implementing AI depending on what that content is. The second is really persistent. It involves everyone. And a lot of people have alluded to this, really clear data governance, meaning you know where their data is going, where it's stored, whether it's being used to train models. You need to think about your translation memories, your voice data. That is all very valuable to someone. And I know of some language service providers, language software companies, not LSPs, in this space that are using that data to train their AI models. They've changed their data usage policies, know which ones are using your data safely, know which ones aren't. And the last one is you really need to have very clear failure and escalation policies. When the AI is wrong, who is responsible? What happens? How are issues detected in the first place? How are issues detected in the first place? In my opinion, it's not just deploying AI, and I'm thinking also about like AI interpreting here, right? You're not just deploying AI and hoping it's going to work out. You need to have something in production live during those interactions to be able to monitor what's going on. So if you need to grab a human, in this case, you had a fully autonomous workflow, that it was detected adequately and rerouted. So those are like 3. I'm sure there's a million more.
No, that's great, Veronica. And yeah, totally about the last one. And also, I often think about how to be proactive about that, because sometimes we just like somehow put the attention as an afterthought, like something goes wrong and then you have to fix it. But how about putting guardrails before so that you don't get to that mistake? If there's anything that is very important to your brand, if there is any sensitive topics that are a big deal for your brand, you can actually use AI to detect those if they are in the text and warn you like warn, red flag, like be careful here. You might need a human to revisit this because it might create issues. So I've been thinking a lot about that as well. So thank you. Those are very 3 great non-negotiables to share. And also like following up a little bit on what we've been discussing. So sometimes when people think about governance or compliance and all these topics is like something heavy and that kind of people don't necessarily like, or it's more like a burden. So how can we make people feel that governance is something that actionable, it's like a shared professional practice that can actually help us be better professionals and have better companies instead of this like compliance legal burden somehow?
It's really hard, honestly, a really hard question to not make it a shared professional obligation rather than like a top-down compliance burden, because the people actually implementing AI governance, like they're building the workflows, they're finding the gaps, they're writing the rules. They are often the same people who are most scared of AI replacing them. So for this to work, for governance not to feel like it's coming from the top, I shift the responsibility back to those executives. This really has to start with them, with leadership being very clear that this plan is augmentation, not just replacement and cost cutting. And it's, words are nice and all, having some sort of guarantee that they aren't going to wake up one morning and lay off a lot of people. So, responsible AI and AI governance, all of that isn't only about implementing this safely, but also how organizations treat their workforce during this transition. If people believe the goal is a better industry, not just a few people, governance, I think, will start to naturally feel like a shared responsibility. But it really is, right now, a lot of people are scared. It really is the executives to assure them that we are just trying to be more productive. We're trying to have more precision. We see, we're not replacing you. And I think that comes from the top. That's not going to just naturally come from the weeds. And that's my opinion anyway. I don't know if anyone else has a different opinion.
I mean, you convinced me, definitely. I'm sure you convinced most of the people watching this. So thank you for sharing, Veronica. And now going back to Coral again on more like specific topics on the translation industry. So are there any translation contexts like legal, medical, humanitarian, where you think we should draw a hard line and say AI should not be the primary tool, regardless of quality of benchmarks? Is there like a hard line somewhere or not?
I think so, yeah. But I believe the hard line is not just about quality benchmarks or even technical performance. I think it's about risk management, professional integrity, and also human safety. So in high stakes contexts like medical, legal, and humanitarian translation that you mentioned, I think we have to look beyond efficiency and focus again on the AI Act framework So medical and legal context are fields that often fall under the high risk category, according to the AI Act, because the errors can lead to physical harm or the loss of fundamental rights. So, for example, in the legal context, we all know that legal translation is not merely about changing words from one language to another. It's about capturing the precise legal meaning and the legal consequences of those words in a different jurisdiction. As of now, AI lacks the capacity for the expert judgment required to understand the true effect and impact of the words that are being used in a different jurisdiction. While AI can assist, it should not be the primary tool because the AI Act requires human oversight, especially in this high risk category, to ensure safety. So in these areas, the professional authority of the translator is key. They are not just checking a machine, they are applying the expert judgment that a product, so the AI, cannot replicate. In humanitarian or crisis contexts, the relational dimension of translation is critical. AI lacks the cultural nuance and the empathy required to protect human well-being and fundamental rights of these vulnerable populations. Drawing the hard line is an ethical necessity because the cost of a mistranslation can be a human life or a violation of safety. But it's also true that in these crisis situations, a fast response is usually needed and vital for the outcome of those peoples that need the translation. So in these cases, when a quick reaction is needed, I believe that any translation is better than no translation at all, as long as it is understood as an emergency solution or even a temporarily quick fix. So yeah, the AI Act requires human oversight in high-risk use cases, precisely because these fields impact the fundamental rights and the physical safety of population. So it's not the fact of translation itself; it's a matter of what type of content is translated and what are the consequences of humans if there's a mistranslation in those content types. Legal, medical, humanitarian work, it's very important to be able to trust the translator, the interpreter, or the document output. So in this context, yeah, AI should remain a supportive technology, but not the primary decision maker, I believe.
Yeah, thank you so much, Coral. You made me think because I think it's even more sensitive in interpreting than in translation. And there is this great video by Veronica and Bridget, who are two of our think tank members, where they did an experiment, like someone calling emergency number and speaking in Spanish and in English, and it had to be translated into Spanish. And there was an AI interpreting in the middle, and it was really not helping. So I think I believe that sometimes that's not better than nothing because then you give the false illusion to people that they are providing the language access, but you're actually putting the life of someone at risk. So I think it really depends on the context, and when there's really a life at stake, please use human people until AI becomes super smart and can replace us all. But for now, let's use humans. Thank you so much, Coral, for sharing your thoughts on that. And please go and watch that video on Veronica's channel. It's really interesting. One more question, and we are running almost out of time. I'm having so much fun with this conversation, but I think there is this $1 million question that I would like to ask maybe to Veronica first and then to Dan, which is, who bears the responsibility when an AI assisted translation causes harm? I'm talking about translation here, but it could be a chatbot or something else. Is it the translator or the operator overseeing that? Is it the agency or is it the tool provider? I think this is such a hard question, almost like coming back to the moral machine experiment that we were discussing also in the think tank. But what are your thoughts?
I actually think there's a fourth answer.
Okay.
And I think it's the customer.
Hmm.
The customer has a responsibility to do due diligence and decide what level of risk they're comfortable with when choosing AI versus human translation. Because at the end of the day, they are going to be the ones dealing with it. That said, the agency or the law department is a really close second because it's also their responsibility to educate the customer on the risks, the limitations, the appropriate uses. You can't just sell AI as faster and cheaper without explaining the trade-offs. I do not think the individual translator should be responsible for the decisions made higher up. I do not think the tool provider like ChatGPT or specifically in our industry like Lara, for example, I do not think they should be responsible for the ways you choose to implement it. So I think at the end of the day, the biggest person I think is responsible is the customer because they are deciding, let's say a customer is a hospital, they are deciding that an AI translator in a life or death situation is good enough. You as the human might say that's a really stupid idea, but they at the end of the day are making that decision. So to me, they bear the fullest responsibility of an AI failure.
Preach. Thank you for sharing that, Veronica. Dan, anything to add to that?
No, I feel like that was the perfect answer. I can't possibly match that.
Great, thank you so much. But Dan, going back to you with one more question, because yes, you mentioned before that there are companies that are using this AI responsible narrative as a marketing tool instead of actually being concerned about it. So, and there is something called ethics washing, which I've never heard that term before, but I think it's a common thing that happens. I wanted to ask you, how do we prevent this ethics washing to happen, where governance frameworks become a marketing asset rather than a genuine safeguard or guardrail in place? How do we prevent that?
Yeah, ethics washing has definitely been an issue from the beginning. I'm going to give an answer that may be a little counterintuitive and maybe even controversial based on the polling answer at the start of the session. But I think the way you prevent it is you demonstrate that AI governance and responsible AI is actually good for business and it actually generates value. And I don't mean that in the way that a lot of people mean it, because I see a lot of people make the argument that responsible AI is good for business because it reduces risk. But my experience is that the risk reduction argument just doesn't work because people in business are natural risk takers. So when you say, if you invest in so-and-so, bad things won't happen to you, you're just not speaking their language. But if you can demonstrate that responsible AI actually does generate value, then it's a totally different conversation. And I honestly think that it does, especially in the generative AI era that we're in right now. Because, I mean, if you've used ChatGPT or Claude just a little bit, one thing you learn is that if you don't give it any structure at all, like any guidance on like what data to use or what the output should look like, then you just get slop. I mean, you just get bad quality output. So you have to provide it some structure and some guidance in order to get quality results. And that's basically what governance is putting structure and rules in place to improve the quality of the output. And so if you can demonstrate that, then there's no need to ethics wash. People ethics wash when they're primarily seeing it as just kind of virtue signaling and looking like, hey, look at us good people doing good things, but they don't genuinely believe in the value. But if you believe that it actually is an asset to your organization, then there's no need to do it. This reminds me of a conversation I had early on. This was back in 2020 when I was starting to do AI ethics audits, and I was talking to a product manager, and he made a really good point to me. He said, it's all in how you frame the topic. He said, if you come to me and say, I think your product's biased against women, then I'm naturally going to get defensive. But if you say, I think your product's just not working as well in women, then I want to know more because I want a better product. You basically just said the exact same thing, but you said it two very different ways, one focused on risk and one focused on opportunity. And I find if you focus on how AI governance and responsible AI actually does generate value, it creates a better product, then you get real investment. But if you focus just on controlling risks, that's where the ethics washing comes from.
Thank you so much, Dan. That resonates a lot with me and with our industry as well, because at the end of the day, is matching what you're providing the service, be it AI governance or AI responsible AI frameworks and so on and so on, with business outcomes, rather than just basically aligning what you're bringing to the table as an expert to the business outcomes that the companies generated. So this resonates a lot with the localization industry, because we've been for many years suffering as well of well, but you need to do translations right and with good quality because otherwise, there will be a mistake, there will be a risk, as you said. And now we are switching the mentality to, well, we need to prove the business outcomes that doing a great translation and great localization actually brings to the table. So it's exactly the same mentality that you described for governance and ethics as well. So I'm so glad that we are more or less aligned in both industries. Thank you so much for sharing. Now we are almost at the end of the hour. I think we have a few questions. We have a couple of last questions for our panelists, but rather we just jump into the questions from the audience because, I mean, there's so much interest, if that's okay.
Yes, we have wonderful questions from the audience. I'm going to start with Remy's first question. It's been voted, and it's regarding governance goals, such as trust, quality, and regulatory compliance. So the question is, how can organizations best map the related risks to their business today? Are there any platforms, and what sorts of platforms exist to have like a consistent industry-approved approach?
Anyone would like to take this one? Veronica.
I can take it. I think the easiest way to do that, and I think as a software person and someone that builds a lot of workflows, so trying to break this down a little bit easier, you need to look at your current workflow steps and you need to figure out like what can go wrong on each one. Honestly, that is like the easiest way you need to look at it. So if you're on a translation, edit, proof, for example, and let's say you decide to automate the translation portion, I don't know, why don't we say we're choosing now to automate all of it? What can go wrong? You can lose a lot of money because you insulted somebody online. You could accidentally kill someone. So then you have to decide, okay, this workflow needs to add additional QA steps or it needs to have additional checks like that. So I think honestly, the easiest way to look at it is you just need to break down in a workflow diagram, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and at each step look, okay, is this overall safe? Yes or no? If no, what can go wrong? And then kind of start to build it out from there.
Closely related to this is actually the next question, and it's also quite practical, and that is, what is a high-risk tier? Obviously, medical and legal are a high-risk tier, but then what about other spheres like business, like websites, social posts? Can you give us some more indication of what high-risk content there is out there?
This is my personal opinion. The way that we categorize, me and I co-wrote this with my mother, actually, who's the most incredible person ever. We categorized the content into 3 tiers, low risk being social media posts, like you're automatically translating something that likely wouldn't have ever been translated historically, and it's actually a good thing for language access. Medium tier business, anything that's kind of internally used could be okay, right? Like there's nothing that's outwardly facing. I would argue possibly marketing material could be okay with some AI. Now I'm not talking about complete 100% automation, but it's not life or death. For me, I only think about tier 3 being loss of legal protection, life or death situations, anything that you're just not willing to compromise on in order, like basically on quality. If you think it's going to cause too much of a risk to you, then that would be tier 3 for you. I think it's really going to depend on each individual company. But I don't know if anyone else like Balaj or Coral have a stronger opinion on that.
Kind of, yeah. It's so I keep thinking that there is in any kind of communication, any kind of body of communication, when an organization is trying to talk about itself, there should be like a 1 to 5% of all the content that should be created by humans, in the sense that you don't the AI won't define your values and identity instead of you or for you. It's something that still belongs to you. It's something that you still need to take accountability for. And it's like you said, Nika, it's a very, 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 very diverse spectrum, if you will, across organizations. It could be different across every organization, that there is always a core. And I would also say that if you don't look at look at it from the risk management point of view. Yeah, like the AI Act does, and then you can classify AI use whether or not it hurts people. And what I'm talking about is clearly not that category. But there's always I sometimes say that don't use AI to generate content that you need to remember and need to defend.
Yeah, thank you.
Kind of.
Yes, and let's squeeze in one more question because it's a very important question and it's actually been asked by more than one person, and it's about educating customers and clients about the current strength and limitations of AI. How can organizations do that? Whose responsibility is it to do that? Remy and Christina are also asking the same question. So maybe that's a question for Coral. Perhaps, how can organizations educate the clients and the customers on the current risks of AI capabilities and things that one needs to take into consideration?
That's tricky. I guess it depends also on what's your type of relationship with your customer. So if you have a close relationship and you can go ahead and educate your customer in these topics, then I think that's wonderful. Also adds a lot of value of you as a partner, as an LSP, if you are able to educate them in these topics. But I guess that a lot of customers, and if you are working with a direct customer and you are a freelancer, maybe this is also out of your league or out of your responsibility, out of your paycheck. There are plenty of companies, startups that are now founded. Actually, in preparation for this panel, I contacted my good friend Karina. She has a startup on AI governance, and she's also a board member of the Austrian government in topics regarding AI and digital transformation. So she has a lot of experience. I would say, if you are not sure about this topic yourself, find a professional, because there's a lot of people that are now getting specialized in these topics and maybe are better fitted. If don't take it on yourself to educate a customer if it's out of your league, let's say.
Thank you. Thank you. So let me pass the word for the closing words by Belén.
Thank you so much, Marina, and thank you everyone in the panel, Dan, Balázs, Coral, Veronica. You did an amazing work. I enjoyed a lot this conversation. I hope this was really helpful for our audience, and yes, thank you. Immensely grateful for your time today, and we'll see you around. Thank you. Take
Just
care.
let me say, we'll see you
Yes.
in 3 minutes exactly.
Yes.
Yes, so stay on the line. We'll
Yeah,
see you in.
just goodbye to the panelists. We are
Yes.
starting right away with the next one.
So we are taking a 3-minute break if you need to grab a glass of water or change position, and then stay online because we are having Miguel Sepulveda telling us about the value of localization. That's the question that is, in everyone's heart right now, and more about storytelling. So stay tuned. See you in 3 minutes.
Okay, everyone. So we are back. It was a uh, very short break. Miguel is now up to stage with me. Thank you so much, Miguel. So I'm going to introduce our next talk and last for the day. So the main question that we will tackle in this next talk today is how can we tell a localization story that drives business value? To answer that question, we have the amazing Miguel Sepúlveda, who's been in the industry since 1995, when he started his career as a Spanish localization specialist for Microsoft Excel 95. Those were the days, I'm sure, Miguel, back then. Since then, he has worked in multiple companies, mostly on the buyer side, and mostly for gaming companies. He's also known for his blog, yolocalizo.com, where he shares his insights weekly. I recommend that you subscribe immediately, as he always shares super insightful articles. yolocalizo.com. We will share it in the chat. And now I give the floor to Miguel to tell us how to tell a convincing story about the value of localization. Thank you so much, Miguel.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hopefully now you see everyone my screen.
Yes.
Perfect. So thank you for being here, and of course, thanks a lot to everyone in the AI think tank community. You have done a massive effort to make this event a reality. I know all the hard work put behind, so we are here. So first thing first, thank you for the energy, the effort, the know-how. So yeah, you did great. Okay, so moving on to my session. I'm really excited about this topic because this is something I've seen come up again and again during my career. When, as Belén was mentioning, when I started 30 years ago, and I still remember like back then in 1995, for many people, localization was almost a black box. People did not really understand why it mattered. Now, 30 years later, I think we are a bit better. Localization is less invisible than it used to be, but honestly, I still feel we are not there yet. That is why I like writing about this topic in my blog and talking about these topics in events like this, because I really believe the work we do as localization professionals is important, and we need to learn to explain it, because the thing is that I often find myself coming again and again back to the same question, which is why is the business of localization still not always recognized? And that is exactly what this talk is about. I think many of us have felt this at some point in our careers. Localization creates real value. I don't think that is the problem. The problem is that this value is still not always recognized clearly by the business. And that can be frustrating because we know how much work, thinking, and coordination goes into making products work across markets. But even then, localization is often seen as a support function or a cost to control. And what I've seen is that this is not just about the value, it's also about the perception, the visibility, and the communication. We may be doing important work, but if the business does not understand that value on its own, the impact stays hidden. So this talk is really about that gap, why this happens and how we can start closing it. The angle I'm taking comes more from the buyer side, from being inside a product company and needing to influence internal stakeholders. But honestly, I think many of these ideas also apply if you work at an LSP vendor, because in the end, the challenge is often the same, making the value of localization clear to the people making decisions. We have a problem with what we explain and with how we explain it, the what and the how. And what I've seen is that part of the problem is not only the value itself, it's the way we explain that value. And I think these are really two different problems. The first one, the what, is that sometimes we are not always explaining the parts of localization that the business should care about the most. We may focus too much on the work itself. The second problem is the how. Even when we are talking about something important, we may explain it in a way that is too technical or too close to our own world, and we use terms that make sense to us, but not necessarily to people outside localization. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you a few ideas that hopefully can help you to explain the what and the how, so we get the visibility we deserve. So let me start with the what, because I think this is where many of us begin without even realizing to struggle to explain what it matters. When we explain localization, we usually choose to talk about the things that are closest to our day-to-day work. That's normal. I get it. I mean, we often talk about delivery, quality, cost, workflows, tools, and all the moving parts we manage every day. And that makes sense because we lie, because in many cases we are nerdies, because that's the work we know the best. The issue is that what we choose to explain, it's not always what the business is most ready to hear. Terms like translation memory leverage, first pass yield, post edit distance, I don't know, LQA score. I mean, all that makes sense to us, but they are mostly meaningful inside localization. They help us understand efficiency, quality, and processes. But if I say to a senior stakeholder, to the leadership team, our team leverage improved, or our cost per word went down, the reaction is often silence, or the question is like, so what? And that is really the point. Useful for us does not automatically mean meaningful to the people making decisions. These terms describe the work, but they do not yet explain the business value behind it. What I've seen is that this is really where the disconnect starts. On one side, localization teams are usually focused on operational KPIs, but on the other side, leadership is usually looking at something very different. They are looking at the strategic KPIs. So the problem is not that one side is right and the other is wrong. That's not the problem. The problem is that we are often not looking at the same picture. We are talking about function health. We are talking about operations, while they are thinking about business performance. And in that space in the middle, that overlap, or sometimes lack of overlap, is what I call the leadership gap. So let's start looking how we can close that gap. So we stay on the localization side of the gap. This is the kind of picture we usually see. These are the metrics many of us work, or similar ones. I mean, there are many, as you know. But we can be talking, and we might be tracking things related to delivery, quality, cost, on-time deliveries, turnaround time, LQ errors, cost per word, and so on. These are real metrics. They matter, and we do need them. They help us understand if our localization program, our localization strategy, if it's healthy, if it's running well, basically tell us that we are doing what we are supposed to do, and that makes sense. I'm not saying these metrics are wrong. I'm saying they are not the ones we should lead or we should show when we are talking to leadership team or product owners or stakeholders in general, because most of them tell us how well localization is running, but not why that performance mattered to the business. And that is why the next question is often, what changed because of that? So now let's look at the other side of the gap. And this is the other side of the picture. This one shows the kind of metric leadership is much more likely to pay attention to. They're going to be interested in growth, in engagement, in efficiency, in revenue per user, and so on. And this is the language of business performance. Leadership is usually not asking how many bugs did we reduce, or what did we do in LQA, or are you delivering on time? I mean, they are asking, did we improve conversions? Did we grow faster in that market? Did we reduce the friction? Did we keep users longer? That is very different conversation. And I think this is where many localization teams get stuck. We already have good operational data, but we do not always connect it clearly to this business outcome. So the value must be, and it's there. I mean, the value may be there, but this is not being expressed in the same language the business make decision. That's what we need to change. So we need to find a way to close this gap, okay? We need to learn to change this mindset and help stakeholders to understand in an easier way and see the value of what we do. So let's learn this in the next few slides. I want to start with this first idea. I want to leave you now. We need to learn to speak and report about metrics that matter. We need to move our conversations from quality to value. Okay, the real move is from operational reporting to business interpretation. From quality to value, from functional health to business impact. And that is where localization teams can become much more influential, because once we start connecting our internal metrics to performance, growth, trust, revenue, then the conversation changes. Then we are not longer just describing the work, but it's more like we are explaining why the work matters. How do we do that? Well, hopefully these slides will give you some ideas. We need to learn to speak the language of decision makers. And we need to learn how to connect our work to the things leadership already care about. We often stop too early. We report the metric and we just think that's enough. We assume the value is obvious, but usually it's not, because it makes sense to us, because we do understand those metrics, but it's not that meaningful for them. So we need to take one more step. Actually, maybe 3 or 4 more steps. That is why I like this formula on the right side. One idea here is to start with the operational metric. That's going to be the one we have in a localization team, and then ask what happened, what changed because of it, which business KPI that is affected, which metric is affecting, what decision should this support. And that is where the metric start becoming useful outside our localization wall and our localization jargon. That's how we are starting connecting what we do with what they need to hear. And on the left side here, I want to show you that this is also a framing exercise. Instead of saying we need better translation quality, we can say poor quality creates customer risk and brand risk. Instead of saying the tone is off, or talking about language style guides or the importance of glossaries and all that, we can say this affects trust. That is the shift. I mean, we are basically doing the same work, but it's a different language, and that's having a stronger impact. I wanted to include this slide, not because I expect everyone to read every line here, or at least not now. We'll have time to cover everything we have here, but hopefully it can serve as inspiration to review later at a quiet moment for you, and reflect which are the ones that might be useful in your case to explain the impact and the value of the work you do. Because, as I said, very often when we talk about metrics in localization, we stay too operational. And what I like here in this slide of metrics that I compiled for you is that it shows the full picture, the operational and the strategic. And we need both. Operational metrics, they help us run the work. Okay, we need them. But strategic metrics help us explain why the work matters. That's how we start connecting and explaining the value of what we do. And the more we can connect the two, the stronger our case become. This is why I think practicing the so what the scenarios is one of the most useful things we can do. It forces us to go one step further, not just what improve, but what change because of that. Why does it matter? What does the business get from it? So in this example, if I go with something like we found 103 LQA bugs in our new game, Mushrooms versus Zombies, well, not ideal. The message is technical fine. It's fine. We are reporting how the LQA went, but it stays inside the localization world. And the second one connects the same improvement, but it's talking about the budget impact and reward reduction. So some result, very different effect. So for me, this is a simple habit that can really help. If you can take any metric you report and then rehearse the so what answer before any meeting you might have with the stakeholders, any presentation that you are preparing, then you are going to be in a much prepared phase. And in many cases, that is exactly what makes the conversation land. So in the summary of the what, before I move into the second part of the presentation, the how, let me quickly recap the key takeaways and the best practices we have covered so far. Operational metrics matter. We need them to run our localization strategy or localization program well. The issue is that on their own, for our stakeholders, they do not explain business value clearly enough. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. And we also saw that a lot of localization language makes sense to us, our jargon, but not always to the decision makers. It explains the work, but not always why the business should care. So the goal is not to stop measuring all that, is to translate those metrics into business meaning and be ready for the so what question. Okay? Now let's move to the second part of the presentation. What we explain matters, yes, but how we explain it matters just as much. Structure matters, framing matters, storytelling matters, the order in which we present ideas matters too. So now I want to move into a couple of techniques that have helped me a lot. I learned them through Toastmasters. In case that you are not familiar with it, it's a public speaking organization. I joined, I think it was 2016 or 17. And if you want to get better at public speaking, let me encourage you to join the Toastmasters organization. It's a non-profit organization with chapters, clubs in many cities in the world. And personally, I cannot recommend enough how helpful it is. It has been really helpful for me in improving how I communicate, how to explain ideas clearly, how to keep people engaged. So yeah, it's really helpful. So let's go with these two techniques. The first one is this framework that I learned through Toastmasters and that I have found very useful since then over the years, and it's called the Temple framework. What I like about it is that it's simple, it's visual, and it's easy to remember, and it gives you a clear structure to build a presentation, a pitch, or even a short speech, no matter the topic. And I have used it for personal presentations, professional talks, and different kinds of business conversations. And the good thing is that it works for different lengths too. You can use it for a short 5-minute talk or for something much longer. And the reason it works so well is the image itself. It uses the analogy of an old Greek temple. So visually, it's easy to remember. So let's look how to use this framework. It's very easy, but let me explain. We have 4 main sections in this framework: the opening, the message, the bridge, and the closing. And let's break them so you can understand better. At the top, you have the opening, and this is the part that gets attention and sets the direction. It's where we introduce the main idea or the key question or the message we want people to remember. Then in the middle, we have the message supported by 3 pillars. And I really like this part because it forces clarity. Often what it happens is we want to talk about many things and we start mixing everything. In many cases, it's coming from a good intention because we are very passionate about what we do and we want to explain everything, but then it becomes confusing. So I like this part in the middle because it forces us clarity. We cannot put everything in the presentation, and we should not, of course. One topic, one presentation. So we cannot put everything in the presentation. We need to choose the 3 points that best support the message. Not 10, not 20, 3. Why 3 pillars? Well, 3 seems to be the magic number for our brains to remember. 2, it feels too little. 4, 5, 6, it's starting to get harder to remember. And 3 is a pattern that we see everywhere. Our brain is familiar to the 3 pattern. I don't know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the 3 musketeers, the 3 wise men, Bini Vidi Vici. I mean, there are many that they are coming groups of 3. 3 just seems to be the number our brains hold on to remember more easily. So let's stick to 3. Then you have the bridge. For me, this is one of the nicest part of the model. The bridge connects the end back to the beginning. It helps the whole presentation feel complete, not like a list of ideas, but like one coherent story. Often I've seen, and I've been in presentations, and probably you too, hopefully not today or in these 3 days, but often what it has happened is that I've been in presentations where the speaker says something like, well, that's all that I have for today. And it feels rush and incomplete. And with the bridge, you don't have that abrupt ending. And it works very well to connect everything. And then at the bottom, you have the closing. This is where you bring the message back together. You summarize the 3 pillars, you reinforce the main point, and ideally, you make a clear ask or call to action. So take the time to get familiar with this framework and learn how to use it, because this framework really gives us a structure, focus, and flow. And when we're trying to explain localization value, that clarity helps a lot. So now let's look at one example, how all this is coming together. I chose this one because it connects well the topic of the talk. The title already shows the direction from support function to growth driver. That is the shift we want people to understand in this presentation we might be designing. So the opening plants the main idea right away. Localization is not a last step service. Okay, it's part of market readiness from the beginning. So from the start, the audience already knows where the message is going. Then the message makes that idea more concrete. Localization helps get the product ready to launch well in every market with local users in mind from the start. Okay, we are perfectly with setting the stage at the beginning. And from there, we built the 3 pillars. Better localization, reduce friction. Less friction, improve trust and adoption. And that is why localization should be seen as growth enabler, not just an execution task. And then the closing and the bridge bring everything back together. If localization is part of market readiness, it can now stay at the end of the process. That is really the strength of the model. It makes the message feel connected, simple, and easy to flow. So that was the temple, the first public speaking technique I wanted to share. Now I want to show another tool that is very useful when we need to explain localization value and in a more persuasive way. This one is more about the storytelling, and it's called The Gap. It's simple, but very powerful. You have probably seen it before in proposals, advertisement, presentations, or even movies. It works because it creates tension between where we are now and where we could be. And the structure is very straightforward. You describe the current state, and we need to be real here. Make an effort to explain what's the problem. Then should show what could be, and finally make the action clear. So paint the pain, and then how to overcome the pain. It works really well, and also very simple and easy to remember. And what I like about this model is that it helps us move from describing work to describing change. And that's exactly what we often need in localization. Not just to say what we do, but to show what becomes possible if the business asks. Okay? So let's look at one example, because I think this is where the gap becomes very easy to understand. Let's imagine we have a digital app and it's not still localizing to Arabic. And we are looking for a way to influence decisions so Arabic becomes part of the markets we operate. Because, well, the MENA region is an important one. So this is how we could make it. On the left side, you have the current reality. The product is still only in English for Arabic-speaking users. That means lower local engagement, lower accessibility, lower growth potential, and on top of that, a competitor is already there. So no language issue, it's also a missed business opportunity. So there we are explaining the current reality, and we are showing the pain. And then in the middle, we are introducing what could be. And this is where the story becomes more powerful, because we will go into the direction of, with Arabic localization, we are not just translating content, we are making the product easier to understand, easier to trust, more relevant to local users. So we're moving from being technically present in the region to actually being ready for the region, okay? And then on the right side, you have the call to action, not just a vague idea, but a clear ask. Support a focused Arabic localization pilot for MENA. And what I like about this example is that it shows the full movement, current problem, better future, concrete actions. That is the gap. And I think this works really well for localization, because often our job is exactly that, helping the business to see the distance between where we are and where could be. And with this, I'm reaching the end of my presentation. So let me close with this. Localization can change everything. Well, we are still in many cases, and we still remain almost invisible. So what we do, you know that it helps people understand, trust, and to feel included. We help to make the products in the different markets feel natural and ready for that market. And when it's done well, people love it and people notice it. It's just experience work. And that's the part of the beauty of our work, but it's also part of the problem. Because if we don't make that value visible, someone else will define a role for us, and usually too narrow, and that will be the service part, the afterthought part. So yes, keep doing great localization, but also learn to explain the value with more clarity, with more confidence, and with more intention. Because behind every metric, there is something human, a person who understands, a person who trusts, a person who stays, a person who buys. So localization does not need more value. It needs more visibility, and that part is in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miguel. I see so many hands clapping here on Zoom. Thank you so much for your generosity in sharing all these super valuable insights. Marina,
My
I don't know
pleasure.
if we have time for maybe just one question, or...
Yes, we have many nice questions, but here comes probably the hardest one. Okay, Miguel, I'm not sparing you. And it comes from Juan. If AI can localize content faster and cheaper than humans, then what unique storytelling value remains exclusively human in localization, and how should teams prove it to the leadership? Have you tried that?
There are different, not all the content you need to have the same level of quality and professionality, and that will be related with a content prioritization, that AI can do something very well, but perhaps for marketing content, for trust creation, for gaming, that's not gonna be always the best tool to use it. So it's a start with recognizing the elephant in the room. Yes, you're right, AI can do many things, but we may not need to use it for everything, for every type of content and for every language. So it's part of the language strategy to segment this. And then once you have that, you explain why you do that. So it's kind of not one size fits all.
Thank you so much, Miguel. I totally agree. We need to be strategic in the way we communicate, and again, show expertise so that we build trust. Going back to the initial topic of today, we build trust with our stakeholders so that they trust our judgment in devising the strategies to deploy AI in the workflows and make the most out of it. So, well, we're at the end of today. Thank you so much, Miguel, for your generosity. This has been an amazing presentation. We
My
learned a
pleasure.
lot. Thank you so much. And this is the end of day one. It passed by very quickly. I hope you enjoyed the sessions, and we will see you again, hopefully tomorrow at 4 p.m. Central European Summer Time for day two, which will be about the people. Today was about the future, and tomorrow will be about the people. Thank you so much, and see you all tomorrow. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.